everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jackie and today I am here to do my April 2020 wrap up. April was a fantastic reading month, by far my best reading month in a while. I read 11 books in April, which is insane considering I still was working like crazy during the month. But I can't believe I finished 11 books and I enjoyed almost all of them. Almost all except for one were above a 3-star read, which is great. And yeah, I am so excited to talk about all the books I read. I also completed my first ever OWLS magical readathon. I completed my TBR for the first time in the 3 years I've done it, which is also great. And I say that because I finished it at like literally midnight the last day of the readathon. I'm filming this the day afterwards, so yeah, I finished it right in the nick of time, but I did finish it. So without me rambling on further, let's jump right in and get started. For usual, I'm going to start off with my monthly stats. Like I said, I read a total of 11 books in April. I had no DNFs. I read 7 physical books, no ebooks, and 4 audiobooks. I had no review books or arcs that I completed in the month. I participated in 2 readathons, and I read a total of 3,158 pages. As far as genres read, I read 8 fantasy, 1 science fiction, 1 contemporary, and 1 poetry collection. And finally, as far as star ratings, I had no books that I gave no rating. I had no 1 stars. I had 1 2-star, 3 3-stars, 6 4-stars, and 1 5-star. So now let's jump into the books I read. The first book I read in the month of April was The Sweetest Kind of Poison by Katie Windsor. Katie is a fellow booktuber. I'll link her down below. This is her debut novel. This is a collection of poetry, and it is all about abusive relationships and being in an abusive relationship. She is writing this from her own personal experience, so definitely a trigger warning for that. And again, I am not an avid poetry reader. It's typically something I don't reach for. It's just not my thing, but I wanted to support Katie, and I actually ended up really enjoying this collection of poetry. I wasn't sure on how to rate it, just because there was some stories that didn't connect with me as much as some of the others. I did tab up a couple. I didn't put the tabs in yet, but I did mark them. But overall, I think this was really well written. I actually have an arc of Katie's next book that's coming out in June, so I'm really excited to dive in, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And for the owls, this counted for the Potions Owl, which was to read a book under 150 pages. Next, I read Every Card a Doorway by Shauna McGuire, which is actually a reread for me. This is a book I picked up on audiobook, and I actually read most of the series this month, which I'll talk about in a second. I got all the way up to the 5th book. I'm still listening to that on audio currently. But this is a series of novellas that follows children after they've come back from places like Narnia and Wonderland, and their experiences like getting used to being back into normal life after traveling through such a magical doorway to a magical world. I read this a couple of years ago. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 4 back then. I still gave it a 4 today. I do wish they were just a tiny bit longer, and I wish there was a little bit more plot development, but I really do enjoy the series, and I gave this 4 stars again. Next, I read Down Among the Sticks and Bones, also by Shauna McGuire. This is the sequel. Actually, technically, it's a prequel to Every Heart a Doorway, and I reread this again, and I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book when I first initially read it. That is still the case then. I gave it the same exact rating as I gave it the first time. Again, I have similar issues with this book as I do with Every Heart a Doorway, and that kind of goes into every single book in the series so far. I do wish the author made the book a little bit longer, but overall I thought that it was just really fantastic, and again I give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I read Beneath the Sugar Sky, again by Shauna McGuire. This is the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series, and I gave this 2 stars, which is a major drop in rating from the first 2 books. I had so many issues with this book, and I kind of went into this in my vlogs, which I'll link up above if I can find them, where I talk about this book. I did not enjoy this book whatsoever. I thought it would have been great, but there was a ton of issues with it. I was so bored in this book. I did not care about the storyline. I wanted to see the characters that we had seen in the first book in this one, and we did see some of them, and that's great, but I felt like I was reading about a whole another set of characters from the first 2 novels, and there was no plot, basically. There is a ton of fat shaming. Our main character that we are following is plus size, and I don't think her character was handled very well, but I did know that going into the book that was going to be the case, but and it's usually not something that bothers me as a plus size person myself, but it did stand out quite a bit in this book. But again, these books are so short that it was why I continue on with the series. So even though I gave this a 2-star, I did continue on. There was another reread for me, and that is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, which if you guys watched my most recent unhaul, you would have seen. I'll link it up above. And I said I was going to unhaul the entire series in that unhaul, and that was my plan. And then the OWLS came around and discounted for Transfiguration, and I couldn't find any other books with shapeshifting in my TBR, or on my TBR in general. So I was like, fine, I'll reread Twilight. And Kevin over at The Irish Reader actually inspired me to do so because he just read the series for the first time. So I reread it, and oh, it was a fun time. I will say that. Twilight is a series I did grow up with. I read it when I was like 13, so this would have been almost a decade ago, which is crazy to believe. And I will say, though it is not the best written series, it has a lot of issues. It is very cringy. It will always have a very special place in my heart, and I think the nostalgia really hit me hard in this book because, like, again, I haven't reread this book in over a decade. So it was almost like reading it for the first time. And yeah, it was Twilight. It was cringy, but it was also a fun time. And I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, this counted for the Transfiguration Owl, which was to read a book involving shapeshifting. This book I read was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, which was yet another reread for me. This was the month of rereads, if you guys couldn't tell. And I love this book so much. Like, I always have. I read this book when I was in middle school. It is one of my favorite books of all time. And I loved it back then. I still love it to this very day. It is just a modern day classic. Everybody knows the story. I don't really need to explain what this is about, but I love it, and I didn't give it a 5 because I still do have some issues with it, but I love it and I gave it 4 stars. I read Into an Absent Dream, again by Shauna Maguire. This is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series, so I'm officially almost caught up. Like I said, I'm on the 5th book currently. This is another prequel book to the main series. It is following a main character, Lundy, who is in the first book, and her adventures in the Goblin Market. And I really enjoyed this one as well. It wasn't quite a 4-star. It's definitely not my favorite book in the series, and I did really enjoy Lundy as a character in Every Heart a Doorway. But again, similar issues with the other books where I wish it was just a tiny bit longer. I wish the plot in particular with this one had been a little bit more developed, so I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling, the first book in the Harry Potter series, which is obviously, if you guys couldn't tell by the state of the book, a reread for me. I love this series. Again, I don't need to explain what this is about. It is my favorite series of all time. I am very much overdue for a reread on this series. I am planning to do a full series reread over the summer, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. I will always love Harry Potter, like, no matter what. It's just so... I didn't grow up with the book series. I didn't read this until I was in high school, but I love it. I love it so much, and I gave it 5 stars. The book I read this month was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which is yet again another reread for me. I read this when it first initially came out in 2018, I want to say, and I enjoyed it very much back then, and I've been meaning to continue on with the series since then. I have The Wicked King on my TBR. I have not had the chance to read it yet because I had completely forgotten what happened to this book, to be honest. And I'm really glad I reread it for the OWLS because though it is not my favorite series of all time, I do see why people really enjoy it and why people give it 5 stars. It is very well written. I do plan on reading more books by Holly Black outside of the series as well in the future. And this is a YA fantasy book that follows our main character Jude, who lives in fairy land. She was raised in the human world, but at the age of 8, her parents were killed by her stepfather, and her and her sisters are taken to the Fae world and raised her for 10 years. We're following them 10 years later. as they are trying to make their way in the Fae court. And there's a main character named Cardin, who is a cool prince, and that's all I'm gonna say. Most people have read this book by now. I enjoy it. It definitely is more of like kind of like a guilty pleasure read for me. I love anything to do with Fae, so that is just right up my alley. I would say if you do like ACOTAR, you would definitely like this series. I think ACOTAR is better, but that's just my opinion, and I gave this 3.5 stars. And for the OWLS, is counted for my charms class, which was to read a book with a white cover. The book I read was House of Salt and Sorrows by Aaron A. Craig. This is a book I hadn't heard like anything about. I heard very briefly mentioned sometime last year, and then I got an Owl Crate box, and I was like, oh, I'll pick this up at some point, and I picked it up for the Owls, and I was shocked about how much I enjoyed this. This is a YA urban fantasy that is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale, which I knew literally nothing about going in. This is following your main character, Annalie, who lives on the coast with her father, stepmother, and her sisters. There used to be 12 sisters in total, but slowly each one of her sisters has been dying off under mysterious circumstances. So we're basically following Annalie as she's trying to uncover what actually happened to her sisters, and it's really, really good. I recommend it. Again, I hadn't heard too much about it going in, but I'm really glad I read it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And for the OWLS, this counted for my Defense Against the Dark Arts class, which was to read a book set on the sea or coast. And finally, the last book I read in the month of April was Middle Game, also by Shauna Maguire. This is her newest book. This came out in 2019, and I literally knew absolutely nothing about this going in. It's very hard to explain what this book is about. I had heard about it from Books and Lala, who is my favorite booktuber. I link her down below as well. And oh my gosh, it blew me away. I was shocked. It wasn't a full 5 star, but I really, really enjoyed it. And again, I finished this extremely last second, like literally as the clock was ticking midnight last night, or as I'm recording this video, is when I finished it. This is a YA science fiction with some fantastical elements, but I would say it's more on the sci-fi side, following twins, Roger and Dodger, who were created by a mad scientist to ascend with him to a godlike power. That's all I knew growing in. That's all you need to go going in. I will say this was very hard for me to get into. It is very chunky. It is over 500 pages. And again, I was trying to read this in like a day and a half. And overall, once it really got going, I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. And for the OWLS, this counted for my herbology class, which is to read a book starting with the letter M. That is it. That is my wrap up for April, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Be sure to know in the comments down below what you guys read in April, as I would love to know. And as always, all my social media links are linked down below for you guys to check out if you'd like to follow me on any of those. All means that I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you soon for another video. Thanks for watching today. Bye!